Welcome, welcome, everybody. Thanks for downloading another episode of Wigs for Wigs. I'm Joe Cook, and I'm joined once again by most of our political panel, Bill Venezia, Dr. Michael Buxbaum, and Judge Ed DeFazio. And here we are for the Donald Trump 136th day of his presidency spectacular. If anybody's a Simpsons fan like me out there, you might know that the Simpsons early on had an episode called the 138th episode spectacular because they forgot to do something special for their 100th episode. We couldn't meet for Donald Trump's 100th day as president, but here we are on his 136th day of his second presidency to bring you all our take on, well, we're pretty in unison, but how badly these 136 days have gone. I mean, we'll find a few bright spots. I don't know. If everybody really wants to only have 2 dolls or 5 pencils for Christmas. But I'm going to go around as always, and we'll get everybody's initial thoughts. What's your biggest takeaway so far from the 136 days that we've been blessed with Donald Trump, our aspiring future pope, as president of the United States once again? Bill, you want to go first?
Well, I'll give you my report card on the economy. It's a D. I'll call his economy the crony capitalism. He's done really, really well with regard to his Bitcoin scam, and also one of the other things that's interesting, his negotiations to combine the Saudi Gulf organization with the PGA, and obviously he brought them both to the White House emissaries to talk about this because ultimately he's going to gain from it. And he's done real well. I think the rest of us have not. I think this is the tip of the iceberg of the economic decline. I also believe, too, that he will capitulate to a certain degree because you're already starting to soften on some of the Chinese tariffs. Because I think that at least I don't know if he's listening to advisors. We're not going to win that war. In fact, that war will be detrimental to both of the economies. And I think it would far impact ours negatively far more than China. So I'll give him a D on the economy. Foreign policy, I give him a D. The erosion of democracy, a D. Just the political corruption that's going on right now in plain sight is extremely disturbing. I think especially that market manipulation of a few weeks ago when he told everybody it's time to get rich, and also the monies that's poured into him in terms of contributions for in purchase of his Bitcoin, Trump Bitcoin, and Melania's Bitcoin, which is tanked and it's left the investors holding the bag while he's come off with a ton of money. It's just sad, and there's no transparency among this. I could go on my. I'll give him one passing grade. That's immigration. He stopped illegal immigration, but at the expense of migrants who are essential to us, and also this issue with Venezuela. To invoke the War Powers Act is ridiculous. He's linking the gangs, the TDA gang in Venezuela, to the Venezuelan government. And his own intelligence department has told him that there's no link there. And I wonder how those Venezuelan Americans in Florida who basically supported him feel that their countrymen are being illegally deported to El Salvador. I mean, it's criminal. It's criminal.
I certainly want to talk about some of those topics you've brought up, but I want to go around and give everybody their first initial thoughts. Doctor, you want to go next?
Yeah, so from my point of view, I think there have been some successes and some failures. The success has been primarily that the border has been closed, essentially. There are very, very few people coming in illegally. And also, but as far as the deportation and so on, that's not going to happen. I do remember we talked before that everybody was afraid that millions of people are going to be deported, but just the 240 or so Venezuelans who are now in jail in El Salvador that caused so many problems, and it's in the news all the time. And this Kilmar Abrego Garcia is the world's most famous prisoner now. So that's a whole another story. But at least he has been able to stop the crossings to a large extent. The other thing, and that's from the point of view of people who do not support the DEI, but the DEI has been curbed. I think initially it may have been a good idea, but it kind of evolved from my point of view into this kind of reign of terror where people were being judged by, through their political beliefs or color of their skin as opposed to their individual merits and individual achievements. So I think it's a good idea that these DEI kind of dictates have been kind of curbed back. When it comes to the economy, I do kind of understand what he is doing, because in order to have fair trade, the tariffs have to be equivalent. So unfortunately, there are a lot of tariffs which, for example, China was imposing on us, and they were also blocking. There are things like non-tariff barriers, where they would prevent American companies to come in and or just not allow certain things to be imported. So I understand in a way that he wants to kind of have a level playing field in order to have a fair trade with other countries. However, he has been doing it more with a hatchet rather than a scalpel. So I would prefer if he was able to negotiate with each country, maybe even threaten tariffs, but not one day say, there is 200%, and another day put it on hold and so on. The only fortunate thing is that he actually does respond to the market. So when the market was tanking, he reversed his course to some extent, because he realized that people's IRAs, about 60% of Americans are in the stock market. So he recognized that, that would cause a lot of problems and unhappiness. As far as what Bill said, I cannot, I believe that you are innocent until proven guilty. So I would like to know if he indeed, bought stock when it was low and then sold it when it was high, and kind of manipulated the markets for his own personal benefit. But until that is actually proven, I'm not going to say he did it. Well, but if he did, it would be unfortunate. So I will stop here.
I believe people are innocent until they're proven guilty too, including people who are being shipped off to El Salvador right now without being put on trial at all. But we'll discuss that after we go to the judge for his initial thoughts.
Well, I'm going to keep it brief at this point. My initial thoughts are that once again, as in his first term, we are being subjected to this media overload, where we are getting news from the White House every day on all sorts of different subjects. It can be as diverse as reopening Alcatraz as a federal prison. It can be giving illegal immigrants $1,000 to return home. And it just continues. And the problem is that because it's such rapid fire coming out of the White House, there's no follow-up by the media as to what happens with some of these proposals. And of course, the vast majority of these proposals never come to fruition. So it makes it very difficult to really analyze where President Trump stands as far as his performance on some of these specific issues. And we can go into the various areas and go from there. But that's what strikes me.
Let me ask everybody their initial thoughts on this question, just to start off on a more lighter note. When this podcast gets us all on the enemies list, would you all prefer we get sent to Guantanamo or Alcatraz?
Whether in Guantanamo, a little better.
Yeah, I would prefer Cuba, I think. Yeah.
Better chance to be liberated.
Well, we saw how Liberation Day went a few weeks ago. I'm not sure liberated means
We were liberated
positive
from
anymore.
our money. You were liberated from your material possessions.
But yeah, we're going to hit on a lot of these topics, but some lighter, some more heavy. But the other day, Donald Trump did sit down for an interview with Meet the Press, and among many things that he said, he answered a question about, aren't you required to uphold the Constitution as president of the United States? And his answer was, I don't know. I have a lot of lawyers who work for me. That was what he followed that up with. Did I miss something? I thought I watched on January 20th where he said that he would preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Is that not the requirement anymore of the president?
He must have
Is
signed
that up to anybody who wants to answer?
I think he signed it. He's going to sign an executive order, basically cutting out that promise that he made on his inauguration day. It's sad, very, very sad. I mean, I think I got to give him an A on accomplishing what he wanted to accomplish, and it's right out of the 225 project in terms of Doge and everything else. I mean, but the conflicts of interest are abysmal. That Musk can get an $880 million contract from the Defense Department to purchase those military-styled vehicles that the military is basically purchasing, or that SpaceX has received more money to basically further the aim. I mean, that this guy basically has been put in charge of something and is privy to everybody's private information is a joke. But then again, he helped put Trump where he is, and it's a payoff, sadly. But the issue of diminishing the democracy of the United States, that's what's extremely disturbing. I had a conversation with Eddie, and maybe Eddie could talk about it. I said, "Are we at a constitutional crisis now?" I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are we? And the last conversation Ed and I had was a 5. I guess it's to be determined. And I also think, I'll let Eddie speak.
No, I agree. That's the conversation we had, and I believe that that's the point we're at. We're not at a constitutional crisis, in my opinion. We're going to see what happens when the Supreme Court enters final decisions on these cases. We're not there yet. I'm optimistic. I believe that when that time comes, that Trump is not going to defy a final order of the Supreme Court. There's no guarantee, of course, but I do think that. And speaking of that Meet the Press interview, there was an example of the point I was trying to make about how we are subjected to these scattershot answers, and he's trying to give answers where he can't get boxed in. And in many cases, he does give answers where he can't get boxed in. But in others, he gives answers that are clearly erroneous, foolish, whatever word we'd like to use. And of course, we all know, and I think he knows. He does know, in fact. He has to uphold the Constitution of the United States. That answer he gave was ludicrous. And he's a very, very difficult guy to pin down. He's always trying to give himself an out. Always. And for instance, he makes that comment that gas is $1.98 a gallon. Now that's clearly not correct. So it's just. But then you hear, well, what he might have been talking about, although he didn't really articulate this, is that's the wholesale. That can be the lowest wholesale price for gasoline.
You're not buying your gasoline wholesale?
Right. Exactly. We're pretty fortunate though here. If you go along Tunnelly Avenue, you can get good gas prices compared to a lot of other places.
The national average is $3.19.
Well,
and
yeah.
What is it in Pennsylvania, Michael?
Well, I only buy the super one, but it's not. It did go down. I mean, the super gas in Costco is about $3.40, something like that.
Yeah. Eddie was right. We're a little luckier in New Jersey. I guess our proximity to the bad air of the Linden refineries. our price is like I don't know.
But going back to the constitutional crisis, I think I'm waiting for the Supreme Court to give a direct order.
Yeah.
Right now, for example, that order was facilitated, and this Abrego Garcia is not a citizen of the United States, so it's kind of vague. But I'm waiting for the Supreme Court to give like a direct order and him to defy it. And if that happens, I'm willing to go to the barricades. And I think it will be like a civil war, even at my age, because democracy is the most important thing we have. And if he defies the court order, the fact is, the Supreme Court doesn't have an army behind it. So it's going to be up to the people to resist. And I do believe the Americans will, because they are, the country is very divided and 50% are, but I wouldn't even say that, because the independents will also go towards the democracy. So it's going to be only about 30% who are these kind of extreme MAGA supporters, and 70% are pro-democracy. Even people who voted for Trump, they voted for him for other reasons, such as economy, immigration, and taxes, and so on and so forth. So I think I would agree with Ed, the judge, that, I think it's unlikely he will completely defy the Supreme Court, but we will have to see what happens. I do think he does have dictatorial tendencies, and he seems to, obviously, as we all know, admire dictators, and he, as a narcissist, he likes to have the absolute power. But I would even say that even though he's a chief commander or the supreme leader, or whatever you want to call it, he doesn't have. I don't think the army would follow him. I think if he said to the Joint Chief of Staff, take over the Congress and stage a coup, I don't think that people would follow him.
Well, Michael, I hope from your mouth to God's ear, but I don't have a lot of confidence that Hespeth would allow that, since they've been purging, like Stalin did in the 1930s, generals that basically they don't see eye to eye with, and been replacing them with inferior people. I mean, it's the history of so far of his administration. He's surrounded by yes people. There's no guardrails there. There's nobody to tell him to speak truth to power. I wish I was as confident as you were. And by the way, the dictatorial, 140 executive orders as opposed to 5 legislative bills passed. We ceased to have 3 operating parts of the government.
Couple things I just want to chime in with. One, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs technically is not in the chain of command of the military. It's an advisory role, so it would be, field commanders and also the Secretary of Defense, people like that, to actually give that kind of Napoleon taking over the Council of 500 order to throw them out the windows. But a couple things in terms of a constitutional crisis, I'm not so sure we're not a little closer than you guys are saying, only because if he does not uphold the Constitution of the United States, and I think in a few ways he has not been upholding the Constitution of the United States, the constitutional solution to that really should be impeachment and removal. Like, that's the constitutional solution to a president who is not upholding his oath, is to be impeached and removed. And there is no scenario where he would do anything where the Republican Congress would impeach and remove him from office. So maybe I'm just playing word games a little bit and overthinking the meaning of things. But a civil war is not a solution to a constitutional crisis. That's a breakdown of the constitutional order. Impeachment and removal should be the constitutional solution to a president doing what they're not supposed to be doing. And in terms of the military, are we not all looking forward to the military parade for Trump's birthday, where apparently he's going to have submarines coming down Pennsylvania Avenue? I've been to a lot of 4th of July and Memorial Day parades. I've never seen a submarine before, so I'm really looking forward to that one. He said that in his interview the other day.
Let's see if that happens.
Yeah.
This is.
I
just want to make a point.
Am I overthinking the wording constitutional crisis? Is it just what I'm doing here?
Well, I don't know. You see, what is the definition of constitutional crisis? It really is not one.
Yeah.
So I understand, Joe, your point, and you're correct as far as it goes. But see, but just to go back to what you were saying about the parade, all right, and the submarine and everything else. I know, but that's a prime example of what we're being subjected to. Is this constant bombardment of information, or even if you want to say propaganda from the White House. It just goes on and on every day. And you know what it's doing? It's wearing people down. In my opinion, it's wearing people down. And like I said earlier, he says so many things that don't come to fruition. And it's all, it all is forgotten. And I know we've mentioned this before. Part of the problem is that the media, it gets overloaded, and there's no follow-up. And that's difficult. I don't know what the answer is. Okay, but it puts us in a difficult spot.
It's bread and circus. It's look at this shiny object over here, while he's doing more sinister things with his left hand.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely an element. There's an element of that.
That's kind of what I wanted to say, that I kind of need to latch on to some of these nonsensical things to get a chuckle, because looking at the stuff that's happening beneath the surface really does wear me out and depress me. So, I mean, I know I'm drawing out some of this nonsense that we probably should just avoid from him, but that's kind of my coping mechanism right now with the Trump presidency.
Yeah, I think go on. Look at the Zelensky talks when he barred the AP, the Associated Press, from being at that meeting, but gave credentials to Russian media, Russian state-run media. I mean, it's kind of, they want to control those issues, So I'm amazed that he did an interview with NBC. I'm amazed that he did an interview with CNN. I think Eddie's right. I think people are worn out, and I think it's with intent to desensitize the public, to take away from some of the sinister things that are happening.
But
go ahead, Doctor.
I actually think that's to his credit that he's willing to talk to potentially hostile media. I mean, he gave an interview to ABC, to Kristen Welker. So Biden, if you compare him to Biden, he hardly talked to anybody. And when it comes to
less sense.
When it comes to lying, they all do that. I mean, I think one of the problems with the previous administration, they all lied about Biden's cognitive abilities. I mean, they lied overtly. They chose and they sort of inaugurated Kamala Harris as the next, as the successor. So, I think these politicians lying about things, that's kind of old news. When it comes to what Joe said, I still believe, I do believe in the American people and the freedom that they fought so hard for. So I think even the Republican senators and congressmen, let's say if the stock market crashed let's say if suddenly everybody's retirement savings went down to 20%, there will be rioting, and people would demand Trump being removed. And I think he would be, because ultimately the Congress is responsible to their public, not to Donald Trump. So I do believe that would happen. As far as the media goes, we do need Walter Cronkite, because right now the journalists are kind of activists, because it all depends on whom you listen to. There's no station that I can think of which is balanced. So basically you need to listen to several stations, in order to get somewhat complete view of things. Because when you listen to one station, it's very left, another station is very right. Walter Cronkite did not even vote because he didn't want people to have a sense as to what side he was on. He explained it the way it was, but we don't have that anymore. So now you have to listen to many different sources, from extreme right to extreme left, before you can make your own decision as to where you want to go.
I agree with you in terms of the obviously the focus they put on things, the slant they put in their analysis of things. But let's be honest, Donald Trump says that people quoting him is somehow biased news against him. If people just ask him about things that he has said, he says that's an unfair question. If he's asked by somebody like Kristen Welker or somebody from one of these news agencies.
Or Terry Moran, or maybe Sid.
Your own words should not be a
nice
thing against you. I wouldn't think.
If there was a constitutional crisis, I honestly believe he'd declare martial law, and then what? Then it would be push comes to shove whether the military would support him or the Constitution, or who that would they support?
Yeah.
And this is all at the largesse of the Republican Party, which is completely co-opted. That congressman who basically he pardoned for egregious sins, criminal sins, was the one that proposed that he be allowed to run for the third time. The gentleman from Texas, I believe he's from. So
yeah, but Billy, I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but you know what? That third term stuff was a bunch of baloney from the start, and it is. And there's a prime example of what you were saying, is that was being put out there. It was part of the shell game. All right, that wasn't going to happen. It's not going to happen. And you see, this is where the American people get distracted. We all get distracted by something that is not going to come to pass. And now, of course, we have him saying that he's ready to pass the baton to Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance. Okay?
Little Marco.
Yeah, little Mark, right. Little Marco now is Big Marco. Okay? So you're right, Joe. But it's like I said, it's very difficult for all of us not to be led down the path. Okay, and just to go back to the NBC interview with Kristen Welker, she really didn't push him around, didn't push back. There was no fact checking really by her during that interview. He got more than a fair shake, I thought, in that interview. But anyway.
Well, but he had his other interview recently where, is it not concerning that he can't seem to tell that the image of Abrego Garcia with the letters MS-13 on his hand were not an actual tattoo in perfect Arial font, not bending at all with the curves of the person's hand or anything? I mean, that interviewer tried everything he could to give Trump move on from that clearly wrong thing Trump was saying and move on to another topic, and Trump wouldn't let it go. But is it not concerning that he can't tell that's not real? the letters and numbers on the person's hand in the image?
Fake news.
Yeah.
Terry Moran did a good job, and he basically said, "You're not being nice to me." Can you imagine the president of the United States telling the interviewer, You got this. I approved your interview."
But he was being nice to him. He was trying to move on and just let him have said his thing and move on to another topic. And it was Trump who wouldn't let it go. This wrong thing he was saying.
Give me Biden's senility. I'm sorry.
Well, they're both. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is this not clear evidence of Trump in cognitive decline also? If he can't tell what's reality and what's not in a photograph?
Joe, I don't, at first blush, you would say yes, that the man is not in contact, with reality, because that was so obvious. But, I wonder whether he just figures that he can say that and score more political points by taking that position and sticking with it, even though we look at it and there's a clear indication, of course, that he is completely off base. So I'm not even sure now what something like that indicates. But he does say things that are wrong, and on many occasions there is no pushback. Even never mind pushback. Pushback might be the wrong word. There's no attempt to really clarify or follow up on the answer. Now, this is relatively esoteric, what I'm going to bring up here. But for instance, during that interview with Welker, mm-hmm. He said, "How can we have thousands and thousands of trials in order to deport illegal immigrants? These are not trials that take place to deport people. These are summary hearings, all right? And I know that's kind of it's an important distinction, but a lot of people don't appreciate it. Mm-hmm. And so he says that, and he makes it seem like, wow, we're never going to be able to deport these illegal immigrants, even if they're criminals and everything. And I'm going to go back to something I had said before. I don't have any problem with illegal immigrants who are criminals or who've already have orders against them, deportation orders, because they didn't show up. I have no issue with those people being deported. All right. But they are entitled to due process, at least to go before an immigration judge and say something. But, these I know that these are technical things, but
it's not. That's the way the system
is supposed to work. You're right. It's not. I should say it this way, Joe. I know that the majority of the public think that these are technicalities. Yeah. And they do. They do. And you're right, they're not. And I don't know how the President Trump can be pressed about these things. I don't think he can.
This is where I'll come to you in a second, Doctor. I saw you wanted to talk, but let me just say, just to follow up, and I'll come to you. But again, this is where I come to my line. I feel like I'm always saying, as a conservative, wasn't our line always that we need the institutions, we need the structures, we need the way the order is supposed to work, because if it can happen to one person, it can happen to somebody else. Isn't that one of the foundational principles of conservatism? And I just wish we could stop calling Donald Trump and his people conservatives and Republicans, because they're really not, by the definition of what we've all come up and known over the years. Sorry, Doctor, I want to go to you. I saw you were trying to get in, but I just wanted to say that.
No, I was just going back to these cognitive issues. I mean, everybody as we get older have some cognitive decline. I mean, nobody has none. However, if you look at Donald Trump, he always, like when he had this birtherism, right? He was denying that Barack Obama, despite seeing a birth certificate, was foreign born. So a lot of these narcissistic dictators feel that if they say something, people will believe them, even if it is not true. Like Adolf Hitler famously said, if you repeat a lie 100 times, it becomes the truth. And unfortunately, with Donald Trump, this percentage of people, which I don't believe is any more than 30%, do believe it if he says it, no matter what the evidence is. But there also leaves 70% of the people who don't believe it. So, I think that if push comes to shove, the American people will actively resist it. And I hope it will not result in a civil war, but I don't believe that the American people are weak enough or scared enough to let like a obese man in the White House with red painted face and a bleach blonde comb over somehow be intimidated by.
How dare you
So
say he's
it's not
obese?
going to
He's
happen.
239 pounds, and he has been for 30 years. I want to throw a question out there, and then I want to go to Bill next, and you can respond to it or anything that people have been saying. But talking about opposition, resistance, the Democrats in these 136 days that Donald Trump has been president. We have Chuck Schumer the other day said he was sending Donald Trump a very strongly worded letter about some of the things Donald Trump has been doing, which we know Donald Trump doesn't read, so I don't know why he's sending him a letter, but he should send him a picture book. But what are the Democrats doing in these 136 days? Are they setting themselves up for any kind of future success? I mean, I know that's something you could talk to, Bill, so respond to that, respond to other things. Go ahead.
I think that there's a schism developing between the over the left side and to the right side. I think they're not focusing on the main thing, which is the economy and the lack of truthfulness in government. Except, I would commend Senator Murphy from Connecticut for laying out giving the report card and laying out all the ills. I caught that on C-SPAN. I was one of 10 people who watched that, probably. And I do think that the Democrats do not have their ducks in a row, and I think they're still evolving to a message which has to come back to the center, because that's what's going to basically win the midterms. So until they're willing to do that and tack to the middle and commonsensically do that, and I'm very questionable on the issue of impeachment. I don't think the time is now for that. I really don't. And I know that some have been clamoring for that. And actually, they've been targeted by Trump, basically being cast as lunatics, the left fringe, communists and socialists and what have you. I do want to commend Bernie for going out on the stump and talking to people. I think that is resonating with people, especially working class people who feel betrayed by Donald Trump with regard to, and especially to farmers in rural areas where Bernie can speak to because of where he is in Vermont. So I don't think that right now. I think they have a mixed message, and they need to get that message right in order to basically form a viable opposition to resurrect as in a united front in 2 years to combat that damage. I also want to say one other thing. Mm-hmm. I think the undemocratic side of Trump, I don't believe in the wars that are going on between him and Columbia University and Harvard and all these institutions. There's a message there. They want to pull money back. I mean, Trump's vision of America is one that is deaf, dumb, and blind. He wants a country composed of Tommies and, uneducated. I read a really good quote from Thomas Jefferson. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects whatever never was and never will be. I didn't know TJ was a poet, but he believed in knowledge and freedom that have to go hand in hand. That is not Trump's dogma. This is coming from a man who never read a book. And I honestly believe all this stuff with DEI is a subterfuge for, the dumbing down of America, coming from a guy who never read a book. And I believe it's also cancel culture at the highest when the federal government is telling institutions of higher learning what they have to teach in terms of curriculum. You're not going to get federal funding. that defeats the purpose of education. Plain and simple.
I mean, I have a very different point of view on that. I do think that higher education, especially those Ivy League schools, and I cannot speak, there are so many different colleges and so on, but certainly a lot of these Ivy League schools went too far to the left. I mean, there is evidence that they would test you politically before they would hire you. And they were, that kind of DEI kind of evolved into kind of racism. It was almost like if you are white, you must be the oppressor. If you are colored, you must be the oppressed, without looking at individual people. I mean, a lot of the conservative speakers were being shouted down by these agitators, So I do think that the university have a responsibility of being incubators of ideas and not being political. Universities should be apolitical, and everybody should be allowed to speak. So I do think there is some truth in pushing these universities to become, reflective of the whole society, and everybody being able to say whatever they want as long as they say it peacefully. And that has not been the case in a lot of these universities.
The criticisms, a lot of it stemmed, and the flag bearing for the right was that, okay, they were basically catering to the Palestinian point of view in Gaza. And since when would that basically be an issue of denying free speech? They polled Jewish students on campuses. They did not feel that point of view made them feel unsafe. Were there radicals? Yes. But since when does basically if you were pro-Palestine and the rights of the Palestinian people, and if you look at what's going on in Gaza today and what Israel, with the support of the United States, is doing, is genocide. Plain and simple.
Well, I completely disagree, but we could talk about this. Maybe we can talk about this privately.
I want to say something, though, and it's to use a metaphor you used earlier, Doctor, which is maybe there's some logical basis for some of the things that he's doing in terms of universities and all, but he's going at some of it with a hatchet instead of a scalpel, because Harvard, for example, he's threatening funding for like Massachusetts General Hospital because a doctor there teaches at the medical school at Harvard. I mean, that's not targeting the free speech aspects of the problem at Harvard. That's just taking a sledgehammer to anything associated with Harvard University, even things that are only tangentially connected to Harvard. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that? Right?
Oh,
it's
100%.
a problem of approach and method.
I 100% agree with you there, that in everything he just sort of says outrageous things and does it in a very chaotic way. So it has to be done more, as you said, with a scalpel, or more thoughtfully, and and try to figure out things without going overboard. But I do think there has been too much liberal leftist bias in all these universities. For example, somebody like Bill Maher, who is a Democrat who never voted Republican, was prevented from giving a commencement speech in Berkeley just because he's supportive of Israel. I mean, it's just like people who support Palestinians should be able to say it peacefully, the same way people who are Zionists should be able to speak peacefully as well. That's what I'm saying.
That's 100%. That's 100% correct. And it goes back to what we were saying. It's all of this bombastic language from Trump when it comes to the universities, and we should have, of course, higher education that reflects various viewpoints and encourages discussion and peaceful protest. But to go back to where Joe started this question about the state of the Democrats right now, they do have to get themselves in order. And I agree with Bill. They have to, and I've been saying it, they have to stake out the middle ground in our politics. And I'm going to go into the camp of James Carville here. I think the Democrats should lay low until they get things together. Because, as you said, these representatives, these Democratic representatives on the left that call for impeachment, that is not going to help the Democrats right now at all. And the Democrats have to be very deliberate in what they are doing. And as we've said previously, in previous meetings of our group, and it goes without saying, the midterm elections are critical to the Democratic Party and critical for our country, but critical for the Democratic Party. If the Democrats do not take back the House of Representatives in the midterms, I would be very concerned about the remainder of Trump's term.
When you told us you were going to give us some Carville wisdom, I really thought you were going to break into a Cajun accent and try to go. But
I have my own accent, but
we've only
Carville, Carville is, although sometimes, let me say this though, Carville can be way off base too, on occasion.
Yeah. We've only got a few minutes left here. I want to go around for everybody's kind of final thoughts, minute each, of your what you're looking for next, what you're think our listeners should be watching out for, or maybe something we didn't get a chance to discuss. You just want to give a little bit of time to, and we'll go in reverse order of how we started. So we'll start with the judge.
I think we're going to have to abide the event on what happens with the tariffs, what the final determinations are. And I also think that we have not yet seen the fallout in the economic statistics about the cuts in the federal personnel. We haven't seen that yet. And when that kicks in, it's going to be interesting to see the effect on the economy. Right now, those people are all still getting paid. They're still technically on payroll. So we'll see.
Doctor?
Well, to me, the most serious problem that we are facing is this exploding debt that we have. And the proposal of Trump for the budget is another $2 trillion a year further deficit, including things like no tax on Social Security, no tax on tips, which are idiotic ideas, and we could have a whole podcast on that. So I'm just very concerned about the future, just like the judge, as far as what's going to happen, because we are paying these huge amounts of money, and neither the Democrats nor the Republicans have come up with a plan which will actually balance it. So we are going deeper and deeper into debt, and that's going to be a major problem. So that's how I look at it. And unfortunately, so far, no politician, the politicians who have addressed it have not gotten any traction whatsoever.
Yeah. Thanks.
No,
Bill?
I'm concerned with the continuing lack of transparency on issues like all of the regulators are gone. They've been let go. So nobody's watching. There's no safeguards for the consumer because there's no more consumer protection. And how do we know how many people were laid off? There's no transparency with Doge. They're not giving us any kind of information. We have no idea who's been subject to that. And that upsets me. The other issue is foreign policy, and we haven't touched it at all. But in terms of that, we have shunned our allies of 75 years. We basically seem to be siding with dictators. Trump, who said he would end the war in the Ukraine in 24 hours or 48 hours after he got elected, has been an abysmal failure. God bless the Ukraine. We're holding still. Even with the infusion of 15,000 North Korean troops, of which 3,000 conservatively have been killed, and that issue is going to resurrect itself, because Trump has now thrown his hands up and said, "Okay, he has no control. Putin is controlling him," and I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the effect that the tariffs will have on our allies in Europe and in Asia, and if Putin's emboldened, what is China? China's emboldened with regard to Taiwan and Korea, and Japan is already feeling threatened. So I think those are issues that we need to come back to and watch that with a careful eye, as well as some sort of watchdog with the government, because it seems that all those watchdogs are now gone.
For sure. All right. Well, if whatever in the lane of watchdogs have been listening to our podcast, and we are all hauled away soon, I hope they let us continue to have Zoom, because the three of you will be enjoying the tropical weather at Gitmo. But I'm not an island person, or at least a tropical island one. I'm gonna take my chances over in Alcatraz. I like the cooler weather. I don't mind the wind. So we'll meet up possibly in those circumstances soon for another episode of Wigs for Wigs. Take care, everybody. The views expressed in Wigs for Wigs are purely those of the individual speakers and are not meant in any way to represent the views of any places of employment,